Welcome again, VUB colleagues. In this presentation, I'm going to cover how to move from an introductory paragraph into an essay. So this will be a little different than test and paragraphs, but hopefully you'll see the relationship between the two. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So the first thing I want you all to remember is that your paragraph, especially your introductory paragraph, is a promise. When I am grading an essay, I am literally sitting down with something like a notepad like this, and I'm looking at the essay on the computer screen, and in the introduction, I'm making a list of ideas, all of the ideas that you present in your introduction. And as I read them, I'm checking them off. I'm noting, are they presented in the same order in the essay as they were in the introductory paragraph? They should be. And I'm making a note as to whether or not all of them were, presented. And if all of those ideas were sort of given equal airtime, right? So all of these things I'm taking in as I'm reading your essay. And so I want you all to start to proofread and edit your essays as a teacher yourselves. So every part of the introduction of an essay will serve a purpose, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at what I mean by that. So let's say we've got another student here who was writing about Yellowstone National Park and preserving its winter wilderness. We'll see what they mean by that. The controversy over the introduction of modern snowmobiling to Yellowstone National Park dates back to 1963. Although a few recreational snowmobilers destroy fragile ecosystems and harass animals as they ride through the wilderness, most love and respect this country's natural heritage. That is why they brave the cold to explore what is left of wild America, Yellowstone National Park. Unfortunately, however, even respectful snowmobilers are unwittingly damaging what they love. Because snowmobiles create both air and noise pollution, and because their use in the park strains the already lean budget of the Park Service, Yellowstone National Park should ban the use of recreational snowmobiles. So let's look at this in depth. I've got a history and a counter argument. I've got the fact that snowmobilers can respect the environment. They can also damage the park, and specifically with air and noise pollution, that the park is operating on a very lean budget. And then I've got this conclusion now, which is my argumentative thesis statement. And that is that last sentence there is the most important sentence of my essay's introduction. And so this is a little different from test and paragraphs where I said your topic sentence has to be first. In your first paragraph of an essay, you're going to have not a topic sentence, but a thesis statement. And that statement should come last while you're in the beginning stages of learning how to write. And so that's what this student did, is slowly start to present history, a little bit of argumentation, a little bit of evidence, right? And then the conclusion there is the essay's thesis statement. And that's the whole idea, is that they want recreational snowmobiles banned. And so here's where the history and counter argument are. Here is where we've got snowmobilers, respecting the park and damaging it, and there's air pollution, noise pollution, lean budget, conclusion. So I would make a list like this as I was reading this introduction to an essay and say, the student promised me all of these elements, okay? And I would say, at minimum, this should be a 6-paragraph essay because the introduction is one, and then I can clearly see at least 5 more elements jumping out at me. So 6 paragraphs, and we'll talk about why. So new high school graduates will typically come in to the Writing 101, and they'll be writing 5-paragraph essays. And this is because their teachers sort of shove down their throat this idea of a 3-pronged thesis statement, that you've got to make this argument and support it by 1, 2, 3 points. And so by the time you've got the introduction, your 3 points, and your conclusion, you've got 5 paragraphs. But this often, it just feels very contrived. It's very hard to write anything longer than a page and a half or 2 pages. And my students who turn in their first essay being longer than 5 paragraphs, I'm thinking, oh, you're in it to win it. You're already ahead above your colleagues, and that's what I want my VUB students going in as. In the 5 paragraph essay, rarely are counter arguments mentioned because there's just not time, right? The thesis statement is very simple and it doesn't include any sort of counter arguments, no room for it in your introduction, and then they don't get to that. But anytime we're talking about argumentative writing, you better plan to write the counter arguments. So as I said before, I want to set you apart from your colleagues, so hopefully this will help you do it. So we might have a three-pronged thesis statement for a 5-paragraph essay on a similar topic that says Yellowstone National Park should ban the use of snowmobiles because these machines create air pollution, noise pollution, and strain an already struggling park ranger budget. Nothing really wrong with that. But when I have a student write, this is a thesis statement in their introductory paragraph, I'm already thinking to myself, ugh, we've got some work to do. The student will struggle to push beyond 2 pages. The student might be struggling to find counter arguments. And so I know they've got a lot of work to do. We've got 1 point air pollution, 2 points noise pollution, 3 points ranger budget. Pretty straightforward. And so this is what beginners will do. But if you want to write something really well developed, you want to get past the stage right now. And so every part of your introductory paragraph serves a purpose. And so we'll go through all of these parts. We already did these purposes. So if you want to go back to that and review, you're more than welcome, but we'll move ahead. What I want to ask you is, could this introduction make an essay that's actually longer than 6 paragraphs, right? And I would say absolutely, right? So you've got early history, um, you've got more recent history, you've got a counter argument coming in there, you've got how few snowmobilers, create damage. Most of them show respect. You've got the topic of air pollution, you've got the topic of noise pollution, you've got the topic of the budget, and you've got the conclusion. So I could say you could take this and run with it and write at least 10 paragraphs, right? Because you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus an introduction. And this can work lots of different ways. Let's say, this is supposed to be 10 pages. Well, that's a couple paragraphs on the early history, a couple on the recent history. Give that counter argument a real good go so that you don't appear biased. Spend a few paragraphs on that, right? And so this is how this works. You look at the page or word requirement from your teacher, you write a good solid introductory paragraph, and then you can start to think about how you can break this down and how many paragraphs you anticipate having and so on and so forth. But that original essay, that we said, oh, that's, 6 paragraphs, it's right around 2 pages or so. I would say you could get at least 10 paragraphs out of that. And, there you're almost doubling your length and your word count, especially if you're talking about adding sources and citations. This could be a very lengthy argumentative essay. So what we want to know is, well, how do we do this? How do we brainstorm or outline an essay? And so I want to show you a cool tool in Microsoft Word that I use because I don't like to download things from the internet and get all sorts of viruses and bugs and all of that. When Microsoft Word has some really good visual tools that you can use. So Microsoft Word has these illustrations that you can insert, and we can talk about them in class. But one is just this very simple matrix here. And so I would have a student start with doing something like this and say, well, okay, so your topic is snowmobiling in Yellowstone. And these things that you don't like about it, right? Air pollution, noise pollution, park budgets being strained, animals are being harassed. Okay, so those are your main ideas. But now you're in college, right? You can't just look at this from a single side. You've got to make sure that a snowmobiling enthusiast might read your essay and say, all right, that person made some valid points. So think about those counter arguments. Yeah, it strains the park budget, but is the park making money from these visitors? You know, um, yeah, some animals are harassed, but the benefit is think about the public appreciation, the educational opportunities for people visiting, and then people who visit to come back to their homes and talk about how wonderful this place is, right? Um, okay, the budget is strained and there's noise pollution, but what's the purpose of a national park? I think that it's for the people of the nation to kind of enjoy the space, um, not just purely to protect the animals. I'd have to go and look at the research, but I would, say that that could be a valid counter argument. And then, with this whole pollution idea, well, okay, but, sure, in 1963, I bet these, machines were real nasty beasts. But, in the 21st century, are we making snowmobiles that have put out less pollution and they're quieter? Probably. So on the one hand, someone might want to encourage snowmobiling in Yellowstone. On the other hand, you've got the student who originally wanted to ban it, which is a really strong argument, right? But as you'll soon find out, not all arguments are, either this or that. So think about, the gradations in between. Can someone promote it responsibly? Can someone just regulate it more? So you don't always have to go to these extremes. When you're brainstorming, you're just plugging in these bubbles, you're just feeling it out, thinking about all of these different arguments and counter arguments. Ask your friends, ask some people who you would disagree with, why they would argue against your argument. And, then you start to find research on snowmobiling and particularly snowmobiling in national parks. And it's great to compare our country to, other countries that are comparable, right? When I say comparable, we're thinking of Western developed countries, Canada, Mexico, Israel. So countries that are not just Western and developed, but democratic, and have heterogeneous populations, which gets a little more difficult, right? We like to compare ourselves to the Swedes when we talk about education, but it's really not comparable with Swedish culture and government. So think about, comparable places that also have these sorts of parks, and do they allow snowmobiling? Well, you're not going to find that in Mexico, right? So I think your go-to place would be researching Canada and how it's dealing with its national parks and recreational vehicles. And so these are things that you're really going to need to consider. So use Microsoft Word and use these visual tools to start to develop something you can organize, right? And we'll talk about that. Really get to know your history. Okay, so now I had all those bubbles from the last slide. I'm going to say, how do I organize these? Well, okay, I've got my topic, and these are the 4 points that I originally started out with, right? Now I'm going to take my bubbles, I'm just going to move them around on the page until they make sense. Really nice to start an essay with some history. Really nice to start an essay with specific snowmobiling research and history after that. Then maybe air pollution and noise pollution kind of go together because thematically they're very similar. Now is when you have that counter argument popping in, right? The new snowmobile, so put that there. In between straining the park budget and animal harassment, a good thing to plug in the middle right there, just like a puzzle piece, is this public education. Yeah, maybe a few animals suffer at the benefit of so many people learning how wonderful these animals are, right? And then what's the purpose of a national park? Increased revenue, these benefits. You've got to make sure, for those 4 green drawbacks I've got 4 blue counter arguments. I've got to be balanced. And now I'm going to come in with the research on other countries. And now, if you weren't already thinking this, you might want to say, let's regulate it more instead of banning it, right? It's a lot easier to convince your reader that something needs more regulation than to say, nope, we're just going to nix it outright, it's done. Right, so ban it, and we already don't want to promote it. We knew from the beginning that we didn't like it, so that's going to go in the trash can, and we're not going to encourage it. That's going to go in the trash can. And so these bubbles, I'm going to put them off to the side. I'm just going to dump them. And now I've got a model of an essay that makes sense. I have actually got 12 paragraphs I could write, and so I've really got to think about what did the teacher ask of me, because these paragraphs could be broken into several paragraphs, or these little bubbles, maybe two of them fit in one paragraph, right? And so I've got to think about how to navigate this. But I love using Microsoft Word for this. Just making my bubbles, squares, triangles, whatever you like. You look at those flow charts, and then you can manipulate them and move them around, and you can start to see how this essay would take form. So I want to leave you with focus on how you say something, not what you say, right? Because as the instructor, I don't care if you want snowmobiling banned, regulated, promoted, not touched at all, right? I honestly, the argument that you're making doesn't matter to me. I want to see how you make the argument. I want to see how you navigate that and think through what people on a different side of the argument would say, and how you start to rebut those arguments and come back with your own. And so I hope that looking at that introductory paragraph helped. I hope thinking about how you can use Microsoft Word, organize your ideas, helps you when you're thinking about brainstorming and outlining an essay. And feel free to be in touch. And I'm excited to cover the next topic with you.